Hi, this is Chris Richards, and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. With me tonight are Kennedy Cooper and James Fauntleroy of the JB Font Show, and Fred Hampton Left. And I'm very glad to have both of them on tonight because, well, Jay was on with me and my former co-host, and Kennedy was on with me and my former co-host, and has been doing this show with me. This is Jay's first time on with Kennedy, so hey.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's my
I wish we were meeting to discuss happier news, but it's still it's nice to be here with you.
Yeah, despite the circumstances, it's always good to meet with friends.
Yeah.
It's true. Sometimes it's better to have friends around when things aren't good, for that matter. I don't like being alone lately.
Well, that's especially true, especially the state of climate of the nation. It's especially hard for those of us who feel like we are what's the right word I want to use? An endangered species.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm sorry. Endangered species are actually listed as protected species. Never mind.
Yeah. So this is more like in the days before the Endangered Species Act, when it was just open season on everything.
Yeah,
That's how it feels.
Yeah, that's how it feels.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you think about some of the things you hear lately too, like the cops who pulled over the army officer in Virginia. Well, we pull you over because you didn't have a license plate. But it shows the temporary tag right there in that back windshield.
Mm-hmm.
And that temporary tag is legally a license plate. They had no business pulling him over.
Well, and from the time they're talking to him, if you watch the video, they're already telling him you're resisting arrest. Like he hasn't even had an interaction with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You can't say somebody's resisting when they have both hands outside of the window.
Yeah, really.
Also, you can't say someone's resisting when you've just begun an interaction with them, and that interaction was not to arrest them for a prior charge. If this is a interaction that's happening in a vacuum, you should not be allowed to say someone's resisting arrest until you're a few minutes at least into that interaction, not just walk up to a car. And the video is terrifying. You're just, thankfully the ending in this case is that they don't kill him, but you still feel like when you're watching it, they're going to shoot him. You really do. Cause they're just walking up with their guns out screaming, you're resisting arrest. You're resisting arrest. He doesn't even know why they pulled him over yet.
In 1959 in Philadelphia, Mississippi, a black Korean War veteran named Luther Jackson was sitting in a car talking to a female friend of his when a cop dragged him out of the car, and a few minutes later, he was dead. Now, he was a Korean War veteran. So, I mean, white cops, well, not even just white cops harassing black soldiers in uniform goes back all the way to the end of the Civil War.
Yeah.
Jackie Robinson was arrested, not shot, fortunately, but was arrested for not sitting in the back of the bus. They were deliberately harassed him because he was a soldier in uniform. In those days, the bus drivers were armed deputies in the South because of Jim Crow. You had to be, the best way to get people in the back of the bus was to legally be able to shoot them if they didn't go.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yeah. What does your duty to your country mean to anyone? If when you get home, you just get treated like shit.
Well, and that's the point to these white supremacist police officers, right? It's to make the statement that there's nothing you can do to buy our kindness, basically. Like, there's nothing that you can do to buy our respect. Even if you serve our country, something that you would think a nationalist of any type would just naturally respect, they still want these people are beyond even that. The police enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacist ideology, and so I think sometimes the cops delight even more in harassing a black or brown person of power, someone of
Well, of course.
stature, right? When they know they can get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
I understand why people use the word, but I get really frustrated when I hear the law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists.
Well,
remember, 1959, they were killing a Korean War veteran in the street.
Yeah, and I mean the only reason we have the law enforcement system that we have is slave catching. It wasn't a lot of people in this country believe that our law enforcement system, the heavy-handed, lots of usually men walking around with sticks, usually white men walking around with sticks, beating people up, that comes from some kind of place of, it corrected some problem that needed to be corrected that was important, or it's preventing some terrible thing from getting worse. No, these thugs were enabled to be thugs to catch slaves. It wasn't to stop murder or rape or burglaries or anything else that you might imagine in your mind, especially if you happen to be a liberal and watching this for some reason, is the reason that the police are there, or that we have this type of modern police force.
And really, that's the best way to put it, is that the cops are there to make certain classes of society fear death and so behave themselves. I mean, cops have wanted to one-up soldiers and make sure soldiers behave themselves in their town, even when those soldiers aren't black. But then when you add white supremacy to it, it's so much worse. Because now you've got double motivation. They're trying to enforce their authority, and they're targeting someone that they enjoy targeting because they're sick. And it's
a dual thing,
and yeah, you go first.
I know it's sad, because when you think about the actual history, it's just law enforcement is basically in itself a slavery and white supremacist institution. And so it's funny how when people balk at when we say we need to defund the police, then they get, as they say, in their britches, about it. I don't want to say the other word, but they get upset. And it's like when you think about the original history of it, and people say, well, you need, law enforcement. It's like, yeah, of course you need law enforcement, but not like this.
Well, and do you need law enforcement?
Well, what does law enforcement mean? I feel like so many people, again, have synonymized, like I was saying earlier, it's like the man with the stick. That's what law enforcement means to a lot of people. I think there are probably other ways to enforce whatever we think is societally like the rules than just beating people up and killing them as our only option. I don't know why that seems to be like the only thing people consider enforcement.
Let's take the really scary scenarios, though. That we love the cops. You have to have the cops. The cops keep us safe. People always go to. Let's pretend we really did abolish the cops tomorrow, and we had to live in the same country with no cops. How would it really be different? Well, so number one, right now, cops solve roughly 2% of all major crimes. So if cops are only solving 2% of major crimes, we're not going to see a huge difference in the number of people getting away with stuff, right?
I think the three of us driving around in a mystery van could solve 2% of major crimes.
We're pretty smart.
My God, that's such a low
3 or 4%.
percentage.
Oh gosh, now I just got a picture of me being Scooby and Chris being Shaggy. It kind of fits, you know.
Well, I know what you mean, but I'm sorry. I'm not making anybody else eat dog biscuits. That's not cool. But no, I have been called Shaggy before. It's true.
Mm-hmm.
You got the look down.
Mm-hmm.
It was a nickname at one of my old jobs, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. The three of us in a mystery van could probably do what, 3, 4, 5%. We're not dumb.
No. I think part of it has to do with this misconceptions because of the indoctrination in media that police solve crimes when actually they don't.
Not often.
A detective can solve a crime, but how many people in police force are detectives?
Not as many as television would like you to think.
No. So I mean, if that's the case, then what are police there to do? I mean, to me, police are just security guards for the power structures for the wealthy.
Yeah, and that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and they're there just to monitor us to make sure that we don't get out of line so that the rich keep being able to exploit without having someone rise up against them. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, and all these people who cheer for the police and say bad things about anything that happens to someone who gets killed by the police. You know, there's a part of them in the back of their head that feels safer every time the cops kill someone, right? When the cops kill someone, they feel like the cops are doing something. And that the cops killing someone's directly made them safer, or the cops wouldn't have done it.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny. I always think about that phrase, especially when Black people say it. They say the system works. My question is, for whom?
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, the system works. And the thing is that the system was never broken. The system was designed this way, so it does work.
Yeah.
It's an unjust system, and it's a twisted system that absolutely must be. I wouldn't even go as far as saying ratifying the system, because it can't be ratified. It needs to honestly just be dismantled and destroyed, and then just created a new one. Because the thing is it's an inhumane system.
It is,
from its inception and down to its most basic programming.
Yeah.
So in order for us to be able to have a actual humanitarian society, it would need to be something that's built from the ground up.
Yeah. Well, there's an absolutist mentality to the way this authoritarian stuff works.
I'm going to comment here. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is right. The system works for the authoritarian. And the authoritarians in this society are a handful of people with enough money to get what they want. One of the things I read this morning, following my usual feeds, was that Andrew Cuomo had an assistant who worked for the governor's office work on completely non-governmental political stuff for him on the clock, which is the same sort of thing as all these things you kept hearing about the Trump White House, you know, breaking the Hatch Act or electioneering in the White House, stuff like that. That's exactly what Cuomo did. He had his government people do stuff that his political people should have been doing on the clock for their government jobs. Because he would rather have the state of New York pay for that than have to pay for that out of any of his campaign funds or leadership funds or heaven forbid, his pocket.
Yeah. The corruption runs real deep.
And the corruption and this goes back to my dystopian jaunt. So we know the cops only solve 2% of the crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how many crimes do cops prevent? Have you ever heard of a cop stopping a rape before it happens? I'm not saying it's never happened before, but I mean, is that something you hear about usually?
No, it's rare. Cops usually come after the fact.
Yeah, you don't hear about cops stopping someone from being killed by a psychopath.
Mm-mm.
No.
Even though they show it on TV all the time.
Oh, sure. I mean, TV's
have you ever
with...
actually seen the police rescue a serial killer's victim alive before the serial killer offs them?
No. I mean, and even if you can find an anecdote, it's not statistically relevant. You know, the data bears out that even if you know some cousin's brother's girlfriend, you know, that was helped by the cops once or something like that, a lot of people justify the entire existence of the police in their minds on some anecdote like that. That's not hard data. I'm always told that the right say things like facts don't care about your feelings and things like that. Well, the hard data says the cops don't work. Okay. You know, yeah, just, I don't know what to say besides that. How do you compare these random anecdotes where, you know, everybody theoretically knows somebody who was once helped by the cops versus the fact that they're the most expensive institution in most cities, and they're just bleeding your government dry? How many of you have a city council, you know, out there watching, or us here on the panel? How many of you have a city council that's constantly whining and wringing their hands about the budget? And then we spend how many millions of dollars on the cops? And then they'll be concerned about some social welfare program that only costs like $500,000 a year and helps thousands of people in your city.
Well, cities are now copying our federal government. Our federal government says they can't afford health care, but they can afford hundreds of billions of dollars for empire.
You know, is this the point that you were making about police not doing anything? It honestly made me think about the Parkland shooting. There was a school resource officer, and he didn't go in there after the perpetrator. He ran away from the perpetrator, and people shamed the police officer.
Yes.
And the funny thing is what that police officer did is actually more in line with what many police officers would have done.
Yeah, sure. Because well, oh, you go first.
Yeah, in a blockbuster movie, that police officer would have went in and saved everybody. But we're not in a blockbuster movie. We are in real life. And that dude was scared shitless. And he just kind of goes in accordance with the whole good guy with a gun trope. Is like, well, there's the good guy with a gun, and there he goes. You know?
Well,
you know, so it's like you're better off arming yourself than calling the police to prevent crime.
Didn't you and a bunch of friends get together with a show named after someone who figured that out? I mean, the whole reason the police killed the Black Panthers is the Black Panthers proved police weren't necessary if a neighborhood organizes itself.
Yeah.
That's true. What I was actually going to say just a second ago. Jay, you said, you know, you're better off to arm yourself. I was thinking arm yourself and start a phone tree in your neighborhood, you know, like you know, go start talking to your neighbors, figure out which ones of them you could trust, get their phone numbers and have a list of, you know, If something's going down, you can call each other. That's gonna save a lot more lives. That's been proven
That, even if
over and over and over again.
Even if no one's armed, that's going to save more lives than an armed SWAT team response.
Yep.
Yeah. Because I mean, you know, even in domestic situations like domestic violence or something, you know, imagine, you know, if you have neighbors who intervene right when it's happening instead of having to call the police, you know, to make a report. It's like, no, you know, um, it's just there's so many different reasons why these days have proven to be as ineffective as they are. And, you know, the thing is that they're even if they were just ineffective, that's one thing. But to see how dangerous they are to people, and not just black people, but the working class in general, it's like, why do we continue to keep having them? And the only answer I can think of to that question is manufacturing consent.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that there isn't another option. We need cops. They keep us safe. They don't, but we believe it. And the belief is harder to overcome than actually needing the cops. The belief that you need the cops is more powerful than actually needing the cops. We actually need lockdowns, but people are protesting them.
And there's just like that one video, it went semi-viral of this police officer giving sneakers to a kid playing basketball. You know, saying, I heard that you like LeBron James, and gives him a pair of sneakers. And it's like, you know what? That's what we call propaganda.
Yeah.
And that's just trying to make them appear better than what they really are.
Yep.
And the same person that gave those kids those shoes, well, they may end up being the same cop that gave that kid the shoes will probably end up being the same cop that'll pull him over and shoot him.
Very possible.
And he'll be unarmed.
Oh
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Which brings me, since we got to the shooting part, this brings me to the question that I have been wanting to ask all night. And I'm glad that I'm able to ask it on air. I've already asked it in print a couple of times, but I can be more forceful about it on the air. What the fuck are these morons in Minneapolis doing, not being able to tell their firearms from their tasers?
They're the professionals, right?
Clearly, they keep us safe.
Yeah. Wow. So professional. What?
Yeah. I mean, it's just so.
And to not keep your shit together during this critical moment, it almost feels like they're intentionally taunting the public.
Well,
and specifically black people.
So,
but definitely, you know, I mean, all eyes in the country are on this trial right now, the Derek Chauvin trial. So I feel like it's like they're just saying we don't give a fuck.
Well, what do you call cops who kill another person while one of them is already on trial for killing someone else? Chauvinists.
Why do we give them money again?
Apparently, we give them money to train them not to kill people, like it's some sort of extortion thing. They killed someone. Let's give them $12 million so they don't kill anyone else. A few years later, they kill someone else. Let's give them $20 million so they don't kill anyone else, and so on.
That's the Joe Biden approach.
Well, I mean...
Well, and you hear this over and over again, the training. That's the liberals have been doing this police training shit for like 50 years.
So let's talk about training, because this is actually good. And while he's disappointing in a number of ways, Lawrence O'Donnell makes the mistake of occasionally telling the truth about cops. Well, he doesn't like cops, even though his dad was one. But and police shootings have been a thing for him for a while. And when he was a real lefty, it was an important issue for him. Sadly, he's not anymore. But but anyway, he still tells the truth about cops now and then. And he had a guest on a show a couple months back now, but I think it's really relevant now, where she talked about how in the academy, when she was being trained as a cop, you'd be in the middle of doing something normal, not in any way related to police work or practicing for police work, class work or calisthenics or whatever. And an instructor would just suddenly pull out a paintball gun and shoot you with the paintball gun and say, "You weren't being careful enough. You're dead." So they actually teach people in the police academy to be scared, terrified of everything, and to believe that every person with whom they interact might kill them at any moment. Now, there's all sorts of ways that you can try to spin that or play that. But when these cops say, "I was afraid for my life," it's because they've been taught from the beginning of their career to be afraid for their life every second on the job. If they mess up, they're dead. It's been drilled into them. And yes. Impossible they don't know a taser from a gun. I agree. At what point was any force needed? I didn't see any. It looks like he was trying to flee, but wasn't he trying to flee like back towards his car? Not like run away from them or anything.
It doesn't even matter if he was trying to run away from them. There's this perception now that it's okay to just live in Judge Dredd society, where a cop just gets to shoot you for the minorest act of non-compliance. Do you realize what a slippery slope that is? But because the minute that you open that door to you can be executed for minor acts of non-compliance, then the cops can kill you for anything. And that's the world that we live in now.
Well, it's worse than that, because they had real problems in Judge Dredd. And we don't have anywhere near those problems, and yet we still want cops like that. I mean, compare the world that people are living in Judge Dredd to the world we're living in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very different. And well, less so now than 10 years ago, but that's another story. But they're living in a literal, well, we're living in a literal dystopia too. So now I'm losing my point. But their crime problem is on a genuinely dystopian level, and ours isn't. Let's put it that way. In the Judge Dredd universe, there are some really bad guys.
Yeah.
But also in the Judge Dredd universe, some of the worst bad guys are judges.
Yeah.
So it goes both ways.
Well, in our universe, some of the worst bad guys are not only judges, but they're also CIA agents and people who work in the FBI, people who are in the executive branch and in the legislative branch.
Well, corruption.
Yeah.
Corruption everywhere.
That reminds me of the Matt Gaetz situation, where people are talking about, especially one particular popular person that we might talk about more is defending, people are just assuming Matt Gaetz's guilt before it's even been determined. I just want to say, for the record, I would assume just about anyone in the federal branch guilty of a crime that they seem to be credibly accused of. I consider most of them to be extremely untrustworthy. Matt Gaetz is not in a special category where I think he's especially bad. If you pick almost any politician, you tell me they're a probable human trafficker, I'm just going to nod and say, I believe that these people are evil.
I don't know some I don't, well, yeah, I mean, pretty much they are. So here's something to think about. And this is something to, even though I'm not a huge Al Franken fan, I do recommend his books, especially The Truth with Jokes. Because in The Truth with Jokes, he talks about these trips that Congress people take to places like Guam and the Solomon Islands for, inspecting the territories and blah, 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 and this and that. And he talks about how contractors in the territories bring people in from other countries to populate houses of ill repute, so to speak. They traffic people and force them to be sex workers, whether they want to or not. They do this with corporate assistance in many cases, because the laws about bringing people in and out with corporations are very fuzzy. And we essentially are allowing sex trafficking in the territories, even as we say we want to fight it in the United States. And Congress people are complicit in this stuff. Tom DeLay who was the majority leader at one point, majority whip at one point. Tom DeLay had a close relationship with a donor who owned a company that was allegedly guilty of this stuff. So it's, of course, I believe most accusations of most people in our government. But, and this frustrates me, I don't like, well, on the one hand, we have to wait till the investigation is done. But on the other hand, we know that the girl was over 18 when Matt Gaetz Venmo'd her. So how do we know she wasn't over 18 when they went on the trip? I mean, it's almost like, and I'll go ahead and say the name, it was Glenn Greenwald. It's almost like he was gaslighting on some level. Because he's saying, well, we need to wait and see what the evidence says. But then he makes all these claims without knowing the evidence. Well, she was 18 when the Venmo payment came through. Yeah, but she was 17 supposedly when they went on the trip. So you follow your own advice and wait before you start sticking up for Matt Gaetz and saying he's being mistreated. It works both ways. If you're a journalist, you're supposed to be doing research and sharing the facts that come out, not defending people you think aren't being given the same protection Hunter Biden was given, which is what it comes down to. He thinks they're throwing Gaetz under the bus, but protected Hunter Biden. And by they, of course, he means Democrats.
Innocent until proven guilty only applies to the court of law. It doesn't apply to journalism.
It's true. If innocent until proven guilty didn't apply in journalism, then, Woodward and Bernstein could never have written all that stuff about Nixon because he hadn't been tried yet.
Yeah. It's ridiculous to think that journalism never, provokes the truth getting out.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, investigative journalism doesn't, help certain crimes get tried correctly or things like
True.
that. Yeah, please. You have to be willing to take a side and investigate it thoroughly as a journalist sometimes. And that doesn't mean that you should be spreading something that you blatantly believe or know to be untrue. If someone is sitting there at the Washington Post or wherever, and they've got some proof at their desk that Matt Gaetz is innocent, maybe not even total proof, but even just some proof, right? And they're still out there just tweeting he's guilty, and not releasing that. Sure, maybe that's a thing, but it's probably not, right? Like, you know, and I think if a lot of people in journalism are feeling like, I mean, we on Not Safe for Wonks, we had a whole, we did we titled it something like Watergates or some silly thing like that. We did a whole episode about him and Nestor and that whole weird situation and the strange history there. And I said, this guy's going to turn out to be some kind of sex criminal. So, you know, yeah, I'm willing to take a stance now and back that up because the evidence has been there.
And Greenwald mentioned that sort of speculation about that first thing, and he was very offended by it. And it seemed to him that it was completely impossible that Matt Gaetz could be accused of having sex with a man who was underage and then be accused of having sex with a woman that was underage. Like, it is completely impossible that the same person might have sex with both an underage man and an underage woman.
So,
well, you know, Glenn Greenwald doesn't believe in bisexuals, right?
He doesn't believe in bisexuals. He doesn't believe in trans people. At least that's how it seems to me. I'll match you there.
Okay. That is the most stupid, disconnected belief that, bisexuals don't exist.
Oh,
don't get me on my rant.
I have a rant because Greenwald shared a thread included and an article by a notorious TERF, like one of the OG TERFs of turfiness.
Wow. So
it wasn't just that he shared a TERF. It was like it was like sharing the TERF. It would have been the equivalent of of the Washington Post. No. Okay. It would have been the equivalent of somebody as respectable as Ezra Klein retweeting David Duke. It's that level of bigotry. This is one of the OG TERFs. And what she was writing was basically accusing transgender culture, whatever that is, of deliberately turning lesbians into men and men into lesbians in order to ruin lesbian culture.
I'm sorry. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
But that was basically the argument that she made, and Glenn Greenwald shared it.
I'm sorry. See, that was my natural reaction, because it's the most absurd thing when you hear somebody say something like that. And as a member of the LGBTQ community, I think that, for him to share something like that is really just like, it's almost kind of a betrayal of the community, which he allegedly upholds. So it's just like, come on, man.
He appears to be primarily concerned with the rights of gay men and lesbians, of which he approves, which is not a terribly unusual position for your old line, your old fashioned gay man of a previous age.
Okay, I'm gonna throw out a new word here. It's called homo supremacy.
Yeah.
So if he's being a homo supremacist, which some of them, they did exist, because if you look at the way trans people were treated, especially back in the earlier days, in the olden days, they would look down on them just for trying to be the gender which they feel that they are deep on the inside. It's like, wait a minute, no. And it's crazy because you were treated in such a way where you were looked down upon at one time, And now you're doing the exact same thing that was done to you to another group that just want to live their lives as in peace as, consenting adults.
But
And crazy, that's the crazy part. It's
but
like,
and there are people who still want to give Glenn Greenwald a pass for everything he ever did because of two stories. And
Absolutely.
Chelsea
well,
Manning,
I mean, if that's the case, then we should have given Bill Cosby, a pass for all the shows that he created.
yeah, no, and
If that's the case.
it's the same, but it really is the same argument. I think we lost Kennedy. Hopefully he'll be back. But yeah, you're right. It's really the same argument. If Glenn deserves that kind of free pass, then why didn't we give that same free pass to Bill Cosby? If Bill Cosby deserved that same free pass, why doesn't everybody get that same free pass? Why have rules or society at all if that's the point?
Yeah. Why did what's your name? She was a TV cooking personality. Her name was
Paula Dean. Paula Dean.
Paula Dean. When she, confessed to saying, the N word, then we should just give her a pass because, everybody knows that, all that butter in that food tasted damn good,
I don't know if that was the specific argument made, but there were lots of people who were saying we should give her a pass.
I mean, if we're going to give her, if we're going to give Glenn Greenwald a pass based on, some of those things, then we should give a lot of people passes.
Well, and I think the fact that he gets away with it to a certain extent just has a certain amount to say about how far we still have to come on like trans issues, gender issues, LGBTQ issues in general, because there's still a lot of room to just run over certain people. And for some reason, Glenn Greenwald will be taken as an authority on like trans issues because he's a gay man over trans people by certain types of people. And like, that's not okay.
No, really not.
But again, it's still somewhat societally acceptable to tell trans people, well, this is how you really are thinking and feeling, and etc. And it has to do with the history of taking trans and gender non-conforming people, taking us to mental institutions and saying this is a problem that you have and trying to explain it. Here's why you have this problem, etc., etc. And as even though like technically the classification has changed and it's no longer considered by major international health organizations a mental illness to be trans, the perception hasn't gone away for a lot of those people, and I suspect Glenn Greenwald is kind of one of them. And that's why he feels he has the right to just talk over the experiences of other people.
I think that sounds right. He's also very quick, and I believe there's a defensive aspect to this. He's very quick to accuse other people of homophobia when the subject of pedophilia comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And his fans are very quick to accuse people of homophobia when the subject of pedophilia comes up. And it's not homophobic to say. It's kind of weird that there's a huge age difference between him and his husband, and that we don't know exactly how old his husband was when they met. We know that his husband was 20 when they got married, and he was 38. So what sort of person needs to wait for someone else to come of age? I mean, it's good that they're waiting, I guess. That's better than the alternative, but doesn't that still mean there's some sort of grooming process going on?
Well, and that's kind of the issue with his defense of Matt Gaetz too, right? Is it's sort of that libertarian magic number line kind of thinking where it's like once they turn 18, that's the magic number, and we don't need to ask any further questions. Someone can still be groomed, human trafficked, abused, taken advantage of, used in, forced into sex work against their will, etc. after the age of 18.
And that's good, because that's important to think about, because yes, adults can be trafficked and abused too, just like kids.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that there's a reason that adults have a legal right to consent and kids don't, and it's not a magic number line. It's the idea that someone's brain has to finish maturing before they're able to make adult decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some truth to that. We know from studying the way our brains mature now that it takes a while. Only instead of being around 18 or 19, we're probably adults closer to 25. So if you want to make an argument about arbitrary magic numbers, well, the neuroscientists say it's 25, not 18.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got to figure there's also some individual variation in all that different people can reach their specific moment of maturity earlier or later than other people.
Yeah.
But if we were just going to arbitrarily draw a line, science says 25, not 18. Why 18?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Funny thing for me is something in me hit when I turned 30. It was, I can't explain it. It's just like 3 weeks after I turned 30, something in my brain just hit, and it was almost like somebody showed me the universe.
I sort of know what you mean.
It's kind of a bit of a comic book reference, but anyways, yeah. So, yeah. So I mean, it kind of goes in line with what you're saying. You know, there's a certain point in your brain that just clicks, and I couldn't even explain it. I can't even quantify it into words. You know, I don't even know if did I even use that word in a correct way. I have no idea.
Quantify? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah. While we're still thinking about Greenwald, I just want to say for the record also that even leaning into the idea that it's homophobic for someone to question your takes about pedophilia problematically leans into the perception that there is a link between homosexuality and pedophilia on some level. I don't even care about Glenn Greenwald's personal relationship that much, in my opinion. If his partner has never come forward with an accusation, then it's not my business.
Yeah.
And that's as far as I really need to go with that in particular. But what I'll say is that he can be gay, not a pedophile, and still have shitty takes about pedophiles.
Yep.
And it's not homophobic to call those out, Glenn. Like that's anyone's allowed to do that. I'm sorry.
As far as I know, Alan Dershowitz, the other person who's defending Matt Gaetz, it should be noted. Alan Dershowitz, who is not gay as far as anyone knows, also has really horrible takes about pedophilia.
He was also implicated among one of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, but
yeah, he was one of like the top 2 or 3 most awful people on the list, supposedly, along with Prince Andrew and somebody else. I can't remember the third.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 2 people who were who were mentioned most unpleasantly were Prince Andrew and.
Can you imagine what kind of a piece of shit you'd have to be for Jeffrey Epstein to be writing about you and just, God, this guy. Ugh.
Yeah.
I think Prince Andrew is disgusting. But yeah, no. I mean, it's like, and the other thing, and this is what really, Gates was up to something serious enough that Bill Barr said investigate him.
In every upper echelon of society, there is some suspect things are constantly going on. I just learned that Prince Philip was cousins with the Queen.
Oh, it's better than that. It's just so he was cousins with the Queen 4 different ways on one parent's side.
Oh gosh.
And then he was cousins with the Queen one way on the other parent's side. So, I mean, there's all this complicated stuff going on. The one thing you have to remember about European royalty is European royalty, most of the stereotypes about, Tennessee and West Virginia and Kentucky are true about European royalty. So they marry their cousins a lot because you have to marry someone royal, and there are only so many other royals around. So they're all related to each other already. And every time they get a couple royals get married, they're all related to each other that much more closely now.
So,
and if somebody ever gives birth to a future king of England with antennae, we know why.
This kind of makes me think of the reason why they have such a disdain for Meghan Markle. I'm sorry, Princess Meghan. It kind of makes a little bit more sense now.
It does, because she's not part of the right club. She doesn't know any of the right people. She's not related to any of the right people.
Well,
even if she weren't black, her white parent is such a complete caricature of a certain kind of white American that they probably think she comes from a trashy family, even if she didn't have a black mom. But yeah, the black makes it that much worse because they're racist as heck. What they don't show you in The Crown is that just a few years after that nice honeymoon in the tree, they started building concentration camps to kill the Mau Mau to put down the rebellion.
However, you have to give some props to the royal family. They said they were going to do something about their racism problem, and then they just killed Prince Philip. That was crazy.
Well, since we're on Prince Philip, I will give you the conspiracy theory of all conspiracy theories.
Uh-oh.
You have to understand that in addition to being so well related to the Queen, Prince Philip was also the last living heir to the throne of the Tsar. Well, not the last living heir, the closest living heir. Now the closest living heir is his eldest son, Prince Charles. But Prince Philip was the last living heir to the throne of the Tsar. If he hadn't married Queen Elizabeth, he would have been stuck living in Lord Mountbatten's house forever, waiting for the CIA to need a replacement, to need a new Tsar for a regime change operation. And the conspiracy theory is, well, he chased Harry and Meghan away right at the time the CIA was trying to get Harry really popular with Americans so he could replace Putin when the CIA op comes. Make Harry Tsar. Because William has to be King of England. They always send a younger son. The reason that Philip became Prince of Greece instead of just Denmark was they sent a younger brother of the King of Denmark to Greece to become King of Greece. And his father, Prince Andrew of Greece, would have been the Tsar if the Allied Archangel expedition had really won the the Russian Civil War for the White Army. So all this younger brothers. So there really is sort of a, well, what if the CIA wants to make Harry czar someday thing going on? But the conspiracy theory is, well, he drove Harry and Meghan away, so the CIA whacked him.
That's a hilarious theory.
Well, I mean, it's not that hard to whack a 99-year-old. So
Yeah, did y'all see the pictures of him in that car coming back from the hospital? He was already dead. He looked like the crypt keeper.
I knew when they sent him home from the film that they were showing that it wasn't a we're sending him home because he's better now. It was a we're sending him home because there's nothing more we can do and we want him to die at home with his family.
Yeah, and he's stable enough to just go die in his bed.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, we can't really do anything, so let's let him go home and be comfortable and happy until the end.
yeah,
So no, I was expecting that when they sent him home. I don't really think anybody whacked anybody,
But it is a fun theory.
well, it's possible. We're always blaming the Russians. How do we know somebody didn't slip, just very low quantities of polonium into his clothes over a very long amount of time so he developed cancer?
You don't, but also he was 99.
I mean,
You think I'm just imagining some people sitting around plotting like we need to take out Prince Philip, and it's like a couple years ago. They're like, he's 97. They're like, okay, meeting adjourned.
I think that's a fair point.
yeah. What's sad is that in the media they're mourning the death of Prince Andrew, but at the same time they're talking about DMX's troubled past, and it's like, wait a minute, what Prince Andrew? He's the face of imperialism from Britain.
Yeah. He's
So,
what's more, there are no pictures of DMX as a young man standing near Hitler.
That's true.
good point.
I checked.
There is that one embarrassing picture of who he really didn't have a huge choice in the matter, but there's this one picture of he was staying with one of his sisters at the time. His sister was married to an important Prussian nobleman who had been connected to the German royal family before the Kaiser was overthrown, and all of his family were Nazis. All his brothers-in-law were Nazis. The whole reason he went to England and joined the British Navy and fought in World War II was because he didn't want to be called a Nazi. But it's just, there are no pictures of DMX with Hitler.
No, you'll find pictures of DMX with flowers, but not Hitler.
I think the DMX like in Prince Philip situation is the perfect example of how just opposed like popular thought and popular media is from mainstream media, because on the internet everyone was like, haha, who cares about the royal family, those guys are a bunch of jerks, pieces of shit, just laughing about it. But on the other hand, when DMX passed, we were all like, damn, that actually does suck. Addiction is a terrible thing. He had struggled with it for so long, and it's really sad to see someone succumb to it, especially someone popular that, had been open about his struggle. Because, speaking from a place of like, I've had some troubles with addiction. I've had a lot of friends who've had troubles with addiction. Some of whom are gone forever. That like, people who are willing to come forward like DMX did and talk openly about his struggles, it's hard to lose someone like that that's such a positive advocate for, picking yourself back up, brushing the dust off, and trying again like he was. So I think the internet naturally flocked to feeling a certain way about his passing. But like you said, Jay, you go on the mainstream media, you get the opposite story. Everyone's going, oh, the prince. And then, oh, DMX. he over the years he lost a lot of money in foolish deals and things like that. Why do we care?
I'm going to mention the race card again, because this is a point where it's important, and I think this comparison is very, very, very valid, because they both had the same kinds of struggles, and neither one of them ever completely overcame them. Nobody called Tom Petty a good-for-nothing junkie when he died. You didn't see the same sort of, Tom Petty is this horrible drug person who preyed on women and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't think I don't know any particular horrible stories about Tom Petty, though there might be some out there. But
he was certainly of an era.
But people did not talk about his drug experiences in the same way they talk about DMX's drug experiences.
Right.
There's a very different tone to it.
Mm-hmm.
And
go back a couple years ago to Amy Winehouse's death. Look at the coverage of that.
Yes.
Same thing. Sad story of addiction taking someone's life who should have been with us for longer, but couldn't manage to cope with this horrible thing that was destroying them.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of cases is larger than just addiction, but is this whole set of societal and psychological factors, right?
Yeah.
Like same story, but how was it treated when Amy Winehouse died?
There's an uglier thing about it that way, is they essentially indulged her downward spiral towards death in order to make money off of it. But then they treated her death as this horrible tragedy, and everybody was so. But they essentially pushed her down that road.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the same could be said for a lot of musicians, including DMX. I mean, the rap scene definitely. If you are a young person who especially has never known any real financial security, and suddenly you're presented with a lot of money and a lot of enticing things, drugs, partying, sex, all these things that, I mean, I'm in favor of drugs and sex. I can't even say, I'm against that stuff, but it can be used as a tool to entice you into a world where people can control you and things like that. And there's a reason why so many cults use drugs and sex in their programming to indoctrinate you and things like that. And so
also the CIA uses drugs and sex to recruit people so that they can spy on their own countries for the Americans.
Yep. Yeah. So, with that in mind, I just think a lot of people, including DMX too, how many times did the tabloids make a headline out of his troubles?
Well, how did the tabloids treat Whitney Houston's death? Let's compare that to Amy Winehouse. How was Whitney Houston treated compared to Amy Winehouse?
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
I would rather them talking about DMX turning to a life of raising orchids, as a hobby, than focus so much on his past, when you have so many others who have had a similar past in the music industry. That's just that's par for the course in the music industry. I mean, everybody has something to do with drugs. I mean, even Michael Jackson died because of a drug overdose.
Right.
But this time it was, it was propofol. It was something that typical people take,
The official authorized movie about the Eagles, which is so big that it's 2 different chunks and it's a total of like 5 or 6 hours. So you have to sit through these 2-3 hour chunks to watch everything. But they're doing drugs in almost every old film clip that's shown. They talk that when they talk about doing their first big studio album and trying to get it promoted, the album producer said, well, and when it was time to do the jackets, well, I always did the same thing. I took them out somewhere and got them high, and we just took pictures of what happened. And so you hear people say stuff like this, and it's like, yeah, okay. But I mean, but then you want to treat it differently for different people for different reasons. And it's gross.
Yeah.
People talk about Snoop Dogg before they'll talk about Willie Nelson.
Ain't that the truth? Damn. Damn. And I'm really glad you brought up DMX's like a passion for plants, orchids in particular, but also like he was into other DIY stuff. I mean, the main place that people met him in the last few years, when you would see people on like sharing their like, this is my memory of DMX, they all met him at the hardware store. Y'all notice that? It's because he was doing projects all the time. He was keeping himself busy with interesting things. And whenever there's like some white mass shooter, we learn all about their hobbies. DMX was a beloved cultural icon. Why aren't we learning about his hobbies more right now? Why aren't the news, why is the media focusing on that more?
I'm just laughing because DMX actually does look like that dude that you see at the hardware store. He just does.
To do this at the hardware store every week.
Yeah, probably at the hardware store. Probably has a Stokie in his ear. Probably looking through different types of plywood, what he needs for his project.
New deck for the new set of orchids.
I could just see him. He's trying to plant, a flower box. He wants to make a flower box for his orchids.
Yeah.
And he's probably going to, do a little paint job and paint, probably a niece's name or something like that on it, which is something I would probably see somebody like him doing because, X has a heart, everybody knows.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, and you want to attribute these, kind of mundane, positive things about him because the media paints so much negativity that you have to forcefully bring out the positive aspects of certain people out because you don't want them to be just known for that negative period in their life, you know. And Earl Simmons was, he was a deep guy and he was a person who had, depth and he was creative in other ways and he had different dreams and aspirations besides just being in rap.
Yeah.
So
He was really good as the heavy in Romeo Must Die.
Yeah, I was gonna say his acting career, that era where rap and action movies overlapped a lot, that was like a huge part of my like growing up experience, and I loved that stuff. I loved DMX as an action star, maybe almost in some ways more than I loved him as a musician. He was so fun doing that stuff. Acting the tough guy on camera. He was perfect at that. I loved it.
What's depressing, of course, about Romeo Must Die is everybody's dead now except Jet Li. And Alia died before she was 30.
Yeah.
And DMX died before he was 51.
Yeah. There seems to be a point where a lot of musicians typically die before they're 50. Or there's also this conspiracy that a lot of musicians died before they were 20, when they were 27.
Another one of my favorite action movies is the same way. Rapid Fire with Brandon Lee and Powers Booth. They're both gone now. Well, Powers Booth was old when he finally died. No, not so much. Not so much Brandon Lee.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I think this goes back to, manufacturing consent, of the media and how they. I might get a little bit of trouble for this, but I don't know if I am. But the manufacturing consent affects those of us in the black community against other black people too.
Oh, yes.
I'm gonna admit something, and I've grown past it, thankfully. But I used to look at certain people in a different way. Like for instance, now I'm not a fan of sports, um, and I used to think of most guys who are in sports as kind of simple-minded, not very complex.
Hmm.
And so when Kobe Bryant came and won his first Oscar, number one, that shocked me because I'm like, he won an Oscar for what?
That's a good
Um, and then when I saw him speaking to the media about his love for the arts, I've never truly heard him speak about anything other than basketball. And typically, when you hear someone like him speak about basketball, it's just like, for me, it was just like gibberish to me, you know. But then you heard him speak about other things, and I didn't realize how eloquent he was. And it was a shock to me. And to me, it was just like, wait a minute, this guy is a deep, multifaceted person, just like any one of us are, is or are. And I had to get out of my head at that point in time that no, he's not just some big, meathead, so to speak, bouncing a ball through a hoop. He's, you know, a person who has many different dimensions to him. And it's the same way, I thought about LeBron James. I didn't think about them as being very deep individuals, but they are. And I think the media, the way it portrays people, especially a lot of black people, it takes our depth away and makes us seem one dimensional. And it even affects our perception of ourselves as being one dimensional when that's not the case.
But then, to be fair, I see people like Eli and Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and
Hmm.
that guy who used to play for the Angels and loves Trump so much now, Aubrey Huff.
Hmm.
And I think to myself, athletes really are dumb.
Don't get me in trouble on here, Chris.
Oh. Oh.
See, now people are going to see I'm laughing and I'm going to get canceled on Twitter. And
No,
geez.
it's like any other profession. There are smart people, there are dumb people, there are good people, there are bad people. Every kind of person in every kind of role, pretty much, except politics, where most people are pretty bad, with the occasional rare exception.
Yeah.
I love them when I find them. They never seem to win their elections. That's probably because other people recognize that they're not evil too. But we think all the time. But even evil is sometimes an exaggeration. Somebody once told me, and this is somebody who met with a lot of people who were in office while they were running, and they said to me, these politicians, they're not very smart, or they don't think they're very smart, and they're very, very scared and make most of their decisions based on fear. And they let a lot of these decisions be made by these political consultants who they believe are really, really, really smart. And we've all seen some of these political consultants on Twitter, and we know that they're not really that smart.
Hell, just because you're a CEO doesn't mean you're that smart.
Listen to some of the things Bill Gates says.
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, and I used to hear all the time, well, Bill Gates is a genius. Bill Gates is a genius. But every time I see Bill Gates on TV, he sounds like a fool and says some really dumb things. And despite being so obsessed with vaccinations, he's one of the biggest reasons in the world that people in Africa have been having trouble getting COVID vaccines.
Isn't he also now one of the biggest private landowners in the United States?
Mm-hmm.
He very well might be.
Yeah. Say he's been buying up a lot of land.
Yeah.
That's disturbing.
It is.
Yeah. How many companies have you worked for where if the CEO just went missing one day, it would make a big difference? Because I can say maybe like one or two of the places out of the close to maybe 20 places that I've worked for in my life or more. Maybe one or two of them would have been actually affected. The rest of them, the CEO could have gone missing, just disappeared without a trace, not left behind a single instruction, and the company would have just moved on.
I feel like I can say safely that at some of my jobs, the CEO probably didn't necessarily even know that the place I was working even existed, let alone what the people who were doing there were doing. So it's like, what would it matter to us whether the CEO was in their office that day or not? They're in another part of the country. Company I work for now, it wouldn't matter to me if the CEO disappeared for a month. The CEO's in New York and I'm out here in Oregon.
Yeah.
I don't even work for a particularly huge company compared to some.
I've worked for companies as small as 10 to 20 employees where you could easily just have the CEO disappear. The only real time that the CEO matters is when your company is like 5 employees. And even then, sometimes you have an absentee CEO who doesn't show up or do anything. But I mean, even at the level where it's like a tiny little small town business with 10 employees, that CEO is nowhere to be found, doesn't know anything, doesn't do anything, could disappear, and everything would just continue without them.
I'm pretty sure you can find them at the country club, and I'm sure they play golf. So there's one place you can always find them and one thing we can always do.
Yeah, I don't even golf.
I agree with a mutual friend who has been tweeting about how much she hates golf for at least now.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of the reasons why I just wish that, every company was like a worker co-op where the workers just own it, because and plus we get paid for our labor.
Yeah.
Or
we could even have one of those things where people have a right to their home and their meals.
Yeah.
Be nice.
That would make that would have made my life a lot more different growing up.
I mean, for all the horror stories that you hear about East Germany, and those horror stories are told very, very deliberately. Did you know that East German women were happier in their relationships than West German women during the Cold War? And the difference with socialism, it turns out that when you can always get your own place and you're not dependent on your significant other for things like food and shelter and making a living, that you can leave if you don't like them. And as a result, since you can leave if you don't like the person you're with relatively easily, people had a tendency to get together with someone they actually wanted to be with, as opposed to just because of economic need. I'm not saying it was a utopia, but women were happier in their relationships in East Germany than West Germany.
There's a huge group of people who are older that are Russian that said that things were better under the Soviet Union than when the Soviet Union fell.
Well, if you compare, so look at what happened when the Soviet Union fell. Boris Yeltsin was drunk all the time and let people like Bill Browder loot the company's economy. I mean, the reason Vladimir Putin has Bill Browder on a watch list is because and wants him arrested every time he sets foot in an Interpol country is because he was one of the people who stole Russia blind.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you go look at surveys of former USSR nations, most of them, there has been a sentiment of missing the Soviet era on the rise. And what's interesting about this is that this sentiment is strongest in the oldest and youngest people. There is a specific age bracket of people that lived through the sort of biggest failures of the Soviet Union and were also fed the strongest propaganda. And those people are still kind of like, no, it was worse back then. But the oldest people remember the best days of the Soviet Union and how good life was. And the youngest people, well, they're kind of like us here in this country. And we're just like, hey, this sucks. You know, and they, God, can you imagine how much more you would feel like capitalism sucked if you knew your country was not capitalism like a few decades ago? I would be frustrated as hell, you know? So yeah, there's a lot of people like frustrated and speaking out in these former USSR countries and the, like I say, the polling shows year over year that it's getting more and more popular, people remembering this, because what did the early Soviet Union do? Laundry is a public service. Food is available to everyone. Housing is available to everyone.
Hold on. Laundry as a public service?
Yes. Something that the early Soviet Union did was they went around and they said, women's work also has to be collectivized and can't be ignored as a part of the socialist project. So in the early days of the Soviet Union, you could get your laundry done and you could get help with a lot of other sort of women's work, household chores thing through collective means.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, yeah, the people who remember that stuff remember it really fondly. A lot of those kinds of excellent social programs were stripped away in favor of militarism. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar? As the Cold War ramped up. And this is ultimately, in my opinion, why like the Soviet Union fails and why something like Cuba was able to prove itself in the long run. Cuba stayed focused on the goal. The number one goal is to make our citizens have the best lifestyle possible. And if we stay focused on that, eventually we'll prove our point. That was like a big part of the Cuban political philosophy.
And also to show how much they could help other countries in a similar size and economic bracket to become less dependent on major powers and more self-sufficient and able to cooperate with each other and countries like Cuba. I mean, Cuba exports doctors all over the world.
Yeah, that was interesting because they had exported doctors for the COVID crisis, right? And then they just come up with their own COVID vaccine in Cuba.
It's supposed to be one of the best vaccines in the world. Definitely in the top 3.
They have some of the best antivirals in the world too.
And Cuba would love to send us that vaccine, but we won't take it.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden is continuing in the long-standing tradition of snubbing Cuba and foreign policy. He's actually worse than Obama on this. You know, people are talking about, oh, in some ways, Joe Biden's more progressive than Obama. Well, not on Cuba. Obama at least talked about opening the doors to with Cuba a little bit. Joe Biden has already made it clear that's not on his radar.
I know they say that, but how is Biden really more progressive than Obama?
Well, that's a mystery.
I mean, the whole point, and I'm under no illusions about Barack Obama, but the whole point of putting Joe Biden on the ticket as vice president was to make the old conservative racists happy.
Basically.
Yep.
Nobody put Joe Biden on that ticket because they thought he was more progressive than Barack Obama.
No. They wanted somebody to make the kind of, because they thought Obama was too liberal, and so they wanted to balance it out by putting Joe Biden in there, by putting somebody to the right of Obama in there.
And then you see the total disintegration of Hillary Clinton's mind when she chooses a conservative running mate because she thinks she's a progressive.
You know, as the more I think about Cuba as a country, apart from the propaganda that's we've been fed, Cuba sounds like an amazing place. But it's funny because every single time you have somebody that moved from Cuba to the United States, they'll have their complaints, but it's always something about, you know, we couldn't advance farther. And it always, you have this picture in your mind of people living in squalor.
So there are, the kind of people who come to the U.S. from Cuba, right? There are three kinds of people. The first, and these are the old Cuban communities in this country that falls into this first category. The first are people who left because of Castro, because they were part of all the awful stuff that was going on for there to be a revolution in the first place.
They were a part of that tiny, tiny ownership class that owned all of Cuba.
All these rich, wealthy sugar planters and all these middle class, it wasn't a huge number, but a lot of reasonably successful urban middle class Cubans who worked for American corporations.
Okay.
So those were so that's the first one. All these people who were either genuinely part of the displaced wealthy when the revolution happened, or whose livelihood was somehow connected to America when the revolution happened. Those people left, or their circumstances were made worse than they had been before the revolution. Most of the people who were persecuted fell into we were making good money off the Yankees and we've lost money under Castro sort of mentality.
Got it.
The second kind was in the 70s when Jimmy Carter was president. Castro very deliberately, after promising to release political prisoners, dumped a boatload of gangsters and criminals on Carter instead, because Carter really didn't have the understanding he thought he did of Cuban internal affairs, and didn't realize that that Cuba's prison population was more criminals than political prisoners. So he thought he was getting a bunch of political prisoners, and he got a bunch of gangsters who promptly sort of melted into the...
While we're talking about the political prisoners, really quick, I just have to interject this. Fidel Castro is forever condemned by these white imperialist nations for killing less people as political prisoners than have been dying in a single day from COVID for over a year.
It's true.
The total number of people that our own government finally, in the end, reported him killing is around like 2,000 political prisoners. So he killed around 2,000 political opponents in execution.
How old was Castro when he died again?
Oh, ancient. God, I don't know.
And he wasn't old when he took power.
No, he was young. And
so what we're saying is this evil dictator who we're supposed to think of so terribly killed fewer people than most American presidents kill in 4 years in like 50, 60
decades, literal decades in power. And he had one incident that I'm not trying to say he should be forgiven for it per se. Now I also am not trying to say that he should be condemned for it per se, because we execute our political enemies.
Well, hey, I
watched in high school. I watched the execution of Saddam Hussein live on television.
Mm-hmm.
So don't tell me that we're above that behavior. First of all,
I remember gloating over what happened to Gaddafi. We came, we saw, he died.
Yeah, Fidel Castro died at 90.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So like 50, 60 years in power, and he killed fewer people than George W. Bush killed in 8.
Because George W. Bush, you can attribute him to what?
At least 1 million Iraqi deaths.
Okay, 1 million. Okay, I thought it was 200,000, but
that's just Iraq, though. That's 1 million Iraqi deaths. That doesn't count Afghanistan. That doesn't count all the little places around the world we don't know about. Because remember, there were war on terror operations in places that were never made completely public while Bush was president.
Of course.
We're still helping the Philippines fight their war on terror. The psychopath Duterte, who talks about having people killed left and right and has been allowing extrajudicial murders of drug addicts and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
He specifically came to power as part of us because he had been involved in helping us fight the war on terror, and he became president because we wanted a strong man to help us out, and our media acts like somehow he's not a product of American doing.
How many times have they done that already so far anyway?
Well, Noriega, when I was younger, Noriega was completely a creation of the CIA. And then when they decided he had outlived his usefulness, they just walked into his own country and arrested him, essentially.
Yeah, your services are no longer required.
And that's the kind of president we've got now in Biden, someone who wants to do that same thing. First thing, bomb Somalia. First thing he did as president after being inaugurated, bomb Somalia. Long before we got the American Rescue Plan, bomb Syria.
So what resources are in Somalia that he really wanted? That's my first question.
Well, Somalia does have oil.
Yeah.
It's not easily exploited. It hasn't been easily exploited for a while because of everything else going on, but Somalia has oil.
Got it.
Somalia also has ties to other countries in the region and some other things like that. But the main reason is that Somalia has oil, and Somalia was one of a list of countries that was trying to find an alternate way of accepting payment for oil than in dollars.
I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right?
Well, let me think of that list of countries. Somalia, Iraq,
Okay.
Venezuela,
Okay.
Libya,
Huh. For some reason, all these names
Iran.
are sounding familiar.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Huh.
I know exactly what you mean. But yeah, no, those are the Somalia, Venezuela, Iraq, Iran, and Libya. Iran, of course, has been selling oil to China and Russia in their currencies for a long time.
Right.
Libya sold oil to Europe for euros. Venezuela went on this completely changed their monetary system so that instead of it was just weird. So instead of basing their currency off the dollar and selling oil for dollars, instead they based their currency off the price of oil, which was the reason that the price of oil collapsed for such a very long time, and why Venezuela is doing so badly economically. The US and the Saudis tanked the price of oil in order to tank Venezuela's currency after Venezuela went off the US petrodollar and instead tried to set up their own oil-backed currency system.
We'll have to do a whole episode sometime about the dual currency period.
Yeah.
In Venezuela, because that's fascinating.
Yeah, I gotta get back to my reading of Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kilton.
Yeah.
Just that actually is kind of opening my eyes a little bit too, and as far as modern monetary theory.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, really, that's just explaining how they already spend money on the military and how we could use it to spend money on things other than the military.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. There's all sorts of fancy stuff, and the Learn MMT people love to talk about it like it's magic, but it's really just spending on our people the way we spend on our empire.
Yeah, I mean, it's that simple. I mean, and
Yeah.
you think about it, it's kind of like when you think about if they were spending on things like healthcare, education, infrastructure, if they spent it the way they spent it on the military, it would be worlds of a difference in the
Oh,
United States. But it's sad that we have to think that when we think about it, it would be such a huge difference. But it is because they basically take the money and put it towards means that are destructive rather than constructive.
and this takes us sort of back full circle to not too long after we started, because you defund the Pentagon, you have all that money for all that other stuff. The same way, if you defund the cops, you have all that money for all that other stuff. The
Yep.
biggest line item on the budget of every major city in this country is their cops. Just like the biggest line item on the US budget is the military.
Yeah.
And until those issues are dealt with, we're going to keep having the same problems. And cops are going to keep killing people because we don't have anyone who's not armed to do that instead of the cops. We've fired them all to pay for the cops.
Yeah. I mean, if you fund authoritarians heavily, then that's what's going to be the influence of your country. And so we have basically a deeply authoritarian country now.
We do. Deeply authoritarian. More authoritarian than many of these countries we're calling dictatorships. The US is easily more authoritarian than Venezuela. The problem in Venezuela is that there isn't enough authority, that there are too many people fighting against the government because of circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
It's their whole issue is that if it were an authoritarian country, I mean, let's imagine just for a moment that Venezuela were really the dictatorship that the media and our political leaders want us to think they are. Why does Juan Guaido's party exist in a dictatorship? Why isn't Juan Guaido dead in a dictatorship?
Furthermore,
kept Juan Guaido around?
Why can I look at the political ideology of parties in Venezuela and see that greater detraction is allowed politically than is allowed in our political mainstream?
Well,
you could not have someone that rejected the system in America as hard as Juan Guaido rejects the obvious elected ruling power of Maduro.
Well,
and have it be accepted by either the Democrats or the Republicans. No one would accept this here in America, and yet we act like it's not enough opposition for them to accept parties like that, even though Juan Guaido and some of the parties that his coalition are affiliated with have done literal acts of political violence to Maduro's supporters.
Yes,
and Maduro is still expected to tolerate them, or he's a dictator.
Well, and that's the whole thing. I mean, so we were just talking about Castro and how for those whole 50 or 60 years, 2,000-3,000 people. Okay. But would Castro in 1965 have put up with someone like Juan Guaido? I mean, even through examples that we've already proven aren't as horrible as we say, Maduro is not very impressive as dictators go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Biden and Obama and Trump all repressed domestic dissatisfaction more successfully than Nicolas Maduro has.
Yeah. Also, if the goal of, I don't want to get too far into this because we're already running on the long side, but if the goal is to go around the world sort of quote unquote spreading democracy and beating up dictators with our military, then why aren't we in Myanmar right now?
They killed right now.
If that's the theory, which for the record, I don't even believe in this good cop world police stuff personally at all. Sure. But if you are out there and you truly believe in this good cop world police stuff that the U.S. military is supposed to be doing or whatever, why are we not in Myanmar right now? Why are we not marching thousands of troops into Myanmar after they've killed over 700 pro-democracy protesters? Unarmed, I want to really emphasize, over 700 unarmed protesters that are protesting the military junta that took over Myanmar because they were upset because there had been too much progress over the last few decades to get rid of regressive government structures.
And that's despite the fact that the prime minister of Myanmar had been rather aggressively persecuting a minority despite all the other social progress.
Yes. The military junta wasn't happy that the country was sort of just half authoritarian instead of full authoritarian, and overthrew an already authoritarian piece of shit leader to install this absolute ridiculous, unlawful, inhumane dictatorship that they have now. I just want to know, if you really think that that's what our military is supposed to be doing, is going around the world like a white knight, saving countries from evil leadership, why the fuck aren't we talking about Myanmar and instead we're dropping bombs on Somalia? There's no logic to this stuff.
Does Myanmar have oil or lithium?
No, it turns out Myanmar doesn't really have any significant, interesting natural resources.
That's why we're not. I mean, if you look at the places that we've made safe for democracy, they all have natural resources. I mean, Afghanistan, gold, lithium, opium. Iraq, oil. Venezuela, which we want to make safe for democracy, oil, lithium. Colombia, not Colombia, Bolivia, which we briefly made safe for democracy before real democracy took over again. Lithium.
Yeah.
It's just so if so it seems like we're only interested in beating up dictators, one, if they have something we really want.
And then two, if they won't give it to us.
Exactly.
Because we're fine with the dictator that's shipping it.
When Saddam was sharing the oil with us, we loved him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why they killed Gaddafi, right?
Well, they killed Gaddafi, yeah, because for years and years and years, he had been selling oil to various European middlemen, not in dollars. And when he started selling oil to I think it was the French and Italian governments for euros, that was just too much.
Yeah.
But no, I think this is a good time for us to wrap up. Been a good talk. I'm glad I had you both. Does anybody have any final thoughts?
You can just catch me at JB Font on Twitter. And you can also catch me on the Fred Hampton Left podcast. We make videos every day, and we are talking to various guests and have various different topics of discussion on policy as well as politics. And so, you can always check us out at Fred Hampton Left on Twitter.
And they're worth the follow. Their content is good.
I just want to say, if you like this kind of, just sort of like you feel like you're just hanging out with the friends, hearing the real talk, that's Fred Hampton Left. Every time I tune in, it's just like, I just love it. Y'all are always just like getting into the meat of why things are messed up, and just talking like you talk when you're just sitting on the porch with your friends, just really telling how you feel about this messed up society. And I obviously I like making media like that, and I also appreciate media like that. So if y'all aren't following Fred Hampton Leftists, you should, because we need more people just telling it like it is, like that, and just venting that real frustration with a broken system.
Definitely. I appreciate that. And you guys have done the same. And I felt like I've been sitting here on the porch, vaping on some weed and having a conversation with you guys.
Hell
we
yeah.
appreciate you hanging with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I found out an interesting bit of trivia. So my final thought, back to the topic of police violence. Going to put Kennedy on the spot here a little. From 2013 to 2019, the state that led the country in per capita police killings. Does anybody know?
I think I do. I think it's where I live.
Yeah. Nearly 10 people for every 1,000. No, 10 people for every 10,000 or something like that killed by police from 2013 to 2019.
Unfortunately, New Mexico has been a little prototypical with some of like the police badness here. And that has like we were one of the first states also to do civil asset forfeiture. And it was so bad here that like they made it illegal at the state level, but then the cops were still doing it, and the FBI had to come in and say, you have to stop doing this. It's not the law anymore. You're not allowed to just keep robbing people of their stuff like highway bandits.
But we steal the drug dealers' stuff. But those people weren't actually drug dealers, it turned out.
But I do have good news on that front, which is that New Mexico ended qualified immunity.
Yes, they did.
Ooh.
That is awesome.
And you can sue the state of New Mexico. Now, that might sound like obvious, but it's actually not. In many states, you can sue individual state apparatuses, but you can't sue the state. The state of Arkansas, for instance, literally references the divine right of monarchy in the laws, where they specify that you cannot sue the state of Arkansas in certain respects, and that they are sort of immune from a certain level of prosecution.
We should not be referencing the divine right of kings in a republic.
You would think.
You would think that the two just are totally. The whole idea of a republic is we don't want the kings anymore. So why reference the divine right of kings?
So anyway, I just want to say as the final note that it's been bad here with the police for a long time. A lot of people have protested hard, done other kinds of activism hard, worked really hard to help see this moment through. And I really hope that we can lead the way in a more positive way on this police stuff in the country. Instead of leading the way in violence, lead the way on, hey, we got rid of qualified immunity. You can too.
And let's look at that for a moment, folks. We found a way, despite this horrible topic, to end the show on a hopeful note and a happy one with some actual good news for a change. So on that note, folks, thanks for joining us. For Kennedy and James and myself, Chris Richards, this has been the Eclectic Radical, and I hope you all have a great night. Take care.